Who's a Heretic Child? By spacesapph1c. Chapter 3. Blessed be their whole mothers. Summary. If we had a daughter, I'd watch and could not save her. Paris Paloma. Quick trigger warnings for filicide, abuse, mention of miscarriage, and super minor character death. Look after yourself. Read at your continue listening as long as you're okay with those things. Okay, enjoy. Duty. Walpurga knew all about duty. Her duty as queen, as a wife, as a woman. And as the wet nurse walked away with a bloody bundle of cloth, leaving Walpurga to the suffocating silence of her bedchambers, it's all she thought of. Duty. As much as Orion berated her, she's well aware it wasn't her fault. If she had any control over the matter, she would have birthed a healthy heir on her first try. She'd laid in this position 3 times now, propped against a mountain of pillows in a loose dressing gown, waiting for her king to storm through those doors to discuss her flaws once again. So she waited. She waited, and she mourned the loss of another child who swiftly left this world as silently as they had arrived. The fourth time, Orion deemed it necessary that she be locked inside. She can't put the child at risk if she just stays put. Days blend into weeks, into months. She sat in her room and watched through the windows as life marched on. The seasons changed, the plants withered away with the incoming winter, and yet Walpurga's world, encapsulated with those 4 stone walls, remained constant as ever. A medic came every day to ensure Walpurga ate her meals and to check on the baby, ensuring her that the pregnancy was going smoothly. She doubted they could tell. She'd been reassured by too many supposed experts of how healthy her child was, only to birth a corpse months later. The monotony of her routine continued to sweep away her sanity until a sudden break occurred. Nothing broke routine like war. Orion visited her chambers for the first time in months to tell her he was needed at the front lines. He said he'd return in time for the birth of his heir. She hoped he'd die and be left to rot on the battlefield. But she played her role, a pregnant wife who had to fight back tears as her husband left to put his life at stake in honor of their kingdom. No one had to know she was holding back tears of joy. With Orion gone, Walpurga's freedom came back. With the king gone, duties of running the kingdom became the queen's to bear, and she did so with the igniting embers of ambition she'd worried had flickered out when she signed her life away on a wedding contract so many years ago. She attended council meetings and held an audience with representatives of the townspeople throughout the day, and in the evenings she was free to wander the palace grounds as she pleased. At night she'd taken to walking the gardens before retreating to her chambers. She'd admired the blooming moon flowers under the watchful gaze of the stars, and oddly enough she'd started talking to her baby. Just about trivial things. It was nice to share her thoughts with someone for once. She had thought of names. That was the king's job. She hadn't thought of names. That was the king's job. Obviously, Orion would continue the tradition and give them an astral namesake. But for the first time, Walpurga allowed herself to grow attached to the thing growing inside her. In these gardens, this baby was solely hers, just Walpurga and her little star. Despite his promises, Orion was not there for the birth of his heir. For the first time, Walpurga was gifted the sweet cries of her newborn, the heir to the Black Throne, a baby girl. Her star took after her mother, from the wavy, inky hair to thin pink lips to almond-shaped grey eyes. None of Orion's curls, pouty lips, or round, heavy-lidded eyes. No, she was all Walpurga's, and Walpurga adored her. 2 years passed, and there was still barely any word from Orion, just the occasional ghost-written letter ensuring he was alive. The bastard couldn't even be bothered to write the letters himself. The war persisted at the northern border, and so the Queen continued her rule. Despite wartime, the kingdom was flourishing. Slytherin was self-sufficient enough to survive without needing imports or trade from the other kingdoms, which was difficult with so much violence and unrest at the edge of their borders. Besides, with the majority of their men off fighting, the demand for resources was significantly lower. Slytherin's war with Durmstrang was being funded by Beauxbaton, so the usual wartime expenses weren't an issue. Walpurga ensured the resources were spread evenly throughout the land, and she funded the education and trade skills of all the young women in the country who were stepping up to fill the roles of their fathers and husbands who were away. It was unheard of, and had she not overruled the councilmen in the royal court, Slytherin would have been left to collapse in on itself, with no one able to pick up the slack of the soldiers who had left home. Walpurga was building a kingdom she could proudly pass on to her daughter, the little Cassiopeia. The princess was the centre of Walpurga's world, all her pain and suffering, and she'd finally been blessed with a child, a daughter who she would raise to take over the throne one day, a daughter who would reign over Slytherin with a power Walpurga could never officially have so long as the king was alive. She may be Orion's heir, but Cassiopeia would be Walpurga's legacy. But all of that was for years in the future. For now, Walpurga doted on the new princess, spoiled her with everything a 2-year-old could imagine wanting. Walpurga set down the last of the documents she needed to get through for the day with a deep sigh. A quick glance out the balcony window told her she had likely missed supper. The sun was setting, casting the sky in a warm blend of pink and orange. "Mamma!" She glanced over at the door, now cracked open, to see her daughter peeking around the edge of the door frame. "Yes, Cassie?" Walpurga answered while walking closer to the toddler before scooping her up in her arms. The gesture brought a toothy grin to Cassiopeia's face. "Tea party, Mamma?" the princess questioned, making the extra effort to carefully enunciate her T's so they didn't make a TH sound. "A lovely idea, my dear." She pressed a gentle kiss to her daughter's nose, reveling in the sweet giggles the action elicited. The pair left the study, and Walpurga signalled for a maid to prepare tea in the gardens. Cassiopeia proceeded to ramble about all the things her mother had missed during the first portion of the day, vivid hand gestures accompanying her words. As they sat in the garden, surrounded by teacups, finger foods, and cakes, Walpurga was perplexed to realize that it was the most content she'd been in years. How odd. Baby toddler over Her baby toddled over and pressed a handful of squished lilac starflowers into her palm. "Phew!" she sung. Her bright grin showed over the gaps for her still growing baby teeth. "Pretty flowers for pretty mamma." "Why, thank you, Cassie," she smiled. "What's the occasion for such a thoughtful gift?" Cassiopeia scrunched her face, as she did whenever she thought over a particularly puzzling question for a 2-year-old. Because I missed you today," is what her daughter settled on. Such a simple answer, and yet Walpurga felt the burn of tears behind her eyes. She pulled Cassie into a hug, burying her nose into the girl's wispy black waves and inhaling the fresh lavender scent. "I missed you today too, Cassie." When summer finally came to an end, so did the war. A treaty was drawn, and Slytherin soldiers returned home in honor and triumph. Orion returned to the castle. Walpurga knew she'd have to take a step down, allowing the king to return to the tasks of running a kingdom now at peace. She knew his presence would be as suffocating as ever, but without the stress of needing to produce an heir and having Cassiopeia to keep her company, it would at least be tolerable. But oh, how wrong she was. When she finally came face to face with Orion, she almost didn't recognize him. A few years near the front lines had somehow made him seem even more cold than he was before. There was no flicker of relief at seeing his wife again, no joy in his eyes at finally seeing his first and only child. Nothing. Just a blank, calculating stare as Walpurga came to stand before him in the throne room hand in hand with Cassie, who was eager to see her father for the first time. It seemed as though the cold greeting was enough to satiate her curiosity, as she quickly pressed herself against Walpurga's skirts, as if trying to hide from the imposing man. After a few more beats of silence, Orion finally flickered his gaze down towards Cassiopeia for a brief moment, before allowing steel-grey eyes to settle forward once again with a deep, loud exhale. "I see you failed me once again, Walpurga." The nerve! Who was he to speak of her failures? She went through childbirth, took the reins of one of the largest kingdoms in the hemisphere, and began raising their child all on her own, all while Orion was busy overseeing a foreign war that they hadn't needed to involve themselves in. And she knows he was not actually putting his life in danger. No, he likely fought far away from the front lines, surrounded by personal guards. The people could call him a war hero, but Walpurga knew her husband was a selfish coward. "You didn't leave me with much instruction on how you wanted the kingdom to run, Orion. I'm not speaking of your leadership," he spits out. His eyes flicker back over to Cassiopeia. "You are the only woman in this family who has failed at producing an heir after so many attempts." "You have an heir. Cassiopeia is in perfect health." "I needed an heir, and you gave me a daughter." "The throne has no use for a girl who will be married off to another kingdom as a bargaining chip in a few years' time." Orion's face further reddens as his anger rises. Walpurga is just as furious. How dare he cast aside her daughter's birthright, her claim? How dare he disregard the pain and suffering she went through for the sake of bearing him a child? Daughter or not, Cassie was first in line, and she'd be raised to reign over Slytherin with more capability than any king. Walpurga would ensure it. "You will have Cassiopeia as heir, or this bloodline will end with our generation, Orion. End of discussion." The queen knew her husband would return changed from the war, but she wasn't prepared for how he would be different. The hit to her face didn't hurt as much as the startled cries from her daughter as she watched her mother stumble to the ground, rocked back by the force of Orion's hand. "I will give you one more chance, Walpurga. If you do not give me an heir, a proper heir, I will find a new queen." The shock finally ran its course through her body as she processed Orion's words. Cassiopeia had gone down beside her, curling her small body against Walpurga's chest as she shook with each sob that racked through her tiny body. She ran her hands through her daughter's soft hair to soothe her, considering the life bearing a son would sentence her little star to. Raised to be a pretty face with no voice, no free will, married off too young to a cruel man she could not learn to love. A life Walpurga was all too familiar with. Orion could make threats all day, but they both knew a remarriage would never be approved of for him. King or not, to bring in a mistress would cause nothing but a scandal for him. Without the church's approval of a new wife and queen, any child he had with another woman would be illegitimate. If Cassiopeia was his only option, she would have security. Hope. "I won't," she finally whispered. It was quiet, but the expression on Orion's face told her that he'd heard it. She gazed up at him, locking eyes as she said her next words. "You will be locked from my chambers from now on. I will not needlessly carry another child to appease your whims. I am done." For a moment the two royals stared each other down, willing the other to step down. Orion glanced away first, and Walpurga felt a sadistic satisfaction with the victory. The feeling was quickly tempered out when Cassiopeia was ripped from her arms. Orion dragged the girl to the foot of the throne with a bruising grip around her arm. before throwing her to a heap on the floor. Her baby was crying for her. Walpurga was screaming, scrambling over to her child, but Orion was faster. He drew the sword that rested in a sheath at his hip, and Walpurga could do nothing but watch her little staff fade away in seeps of scarlet on that cold stone floor. The following winter she was pregnant again. The grief that had consumed her after Cassiopeia left her in a sort of daze. She was numb to everything around her, and fighting with Orion was worth more energy than she had. She buried her daughter in the garden. She wasn't allowed a grave marker, so she had the burial site surrounded by a ring of purple starflowers. Everyone else may forget the young princess, but Walpurga never would. She would continue returning to that patch of grounded stars and have tea during sunsets, thinking of black pigtail braids interwoven with the surrounding flora. The king let her be for the most part. In fact, they wouldn't exchange words until the fall. November 3rd. The queen had given birth to a healthy baby boy. Sirius Orion Black was declared heir to the southern throne. The kingdom rejoiced and celebrated the new royal baby. Walpurga locked herself in her room. She completed the task required of her position, and that was that. She wanted nothing to do with the boy. If he didn't exist, maybe Orion would have felt the consequences of the filicide he committed. Instead, the universe rewarded his wrongs with the very thing he wanted. For a while, Orion would pester her about having a spare. After 2 years of trying, it seemed natural. It seemed nature had finally taken her side, making her barren. Honestly, Walpurga was certain Orion would get rid of her after hearing the news from the medics. Oddly enough, he seemed indifferent to the matter. He'd been occupied with other matters as of late, so perhaps he simply couldn't be bothered to deal with it in the moment. Every day he buried himself with the search parties in the woods, hunting magic folk since he deemed it a problem in recent years, despite the fact that the Fae had always remained hidden. They were reclusive creatures that never lashed out unprompted. Walpurga found them disgusting, but she was practical. It was a waste of time and resources to look for the cause of a non-existent problem. It wasn't until she heard of her that she realized what had really been keeping Orion busy all these evenings. God, how would the country react if they knew their king, an advocate for eradicating the fair folk, was fucking the Fae? She couldn't care less. She had no love for Orion, and time he spent with his mistress was time he spent away from her. The arrangement was perfect until the little harlot got knocked up and died in labor. Perga honestly thought Orion wouldn't have the audacity to bring the little mutt into her home, but alas, there he was, waltzing into the great chamber with a newborn held clumsily in his grasp. Her husband had no idea how to care for a child. She'd done the bare minimum to care for Sirius as an infant, and as soon as he was weaned, she handed him off to the maids to do the rest. If Orion thought she would put even a sliver of effort into keeping the halfling alive, he was a bigger fool than she thought. He proceeded to spew some nonsense about how he expected her to treat the child as her own flesh and blood, which was ridiculous. The only reason she entertained his incoherent ramblings as long as she did was due to the look of utter heartbreak he wore. Eyes were red-rimmed and breaths frantic. It was clear he wasn't handling the death of his mistress well, and maybe taking in the child rather than leaving it to die on the forest floor was proof of his genuine devotion to her. The thought was quite comforting that he may have lost something important to him. Finally felt a fraction of the pain she felt when he ripped away her only happiness. He stepped closer to her, as if to hand off the baby, and with a scoff she made her way to spend another evening in the gardens. Guys, ow! My heart. Okay. I genuinely almost started crying, and then I was like, no, breathe. We gotta read this. We gotta finish reading. Okay, I'm gonna have to go put the little trigger warning at the start because I missed it. I did actually see it last time, but I missed it this time by accident. Oopsie daisy. I forgot about it. Oh my god, I'm gonna cry. That was so sad. Seriously, that was so sad. Why did Cassiopeia have to die? I could not pronounce Cassiopeia for the life of me. um, I could. Why did she have to die? I saw it coming. Yeah, not fully, but like that kind of. We know the characters. I knew it wasn't going to end well for her. I was like, we don't hear of Cassiopeia at all from Sirius or Regulus. We don't even hear from Orion actually. The first chapter. Jeez. I'm gonna cry now. See you guys later. I'll see you guys in the next chapter. Um, Tell me what you thought of this chapter because I'm gonna cry. What? That was mean. Didn't even kiss the. No, they did kiss the bricks. That was so well written, but like, I'm gonna cry. Okay, I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you enjoyed. Bye bye.